listeners, and welcome back. This is Andrew McPeak, and with me, of course, is my lovely co-host, Gina Watts.
Hey, friends.
Folks, if you believe that schools should be more than just about essays and GPAs, if you believe that EQs are just as important as IQs, and if you expect amazing things from the next generation, then you are in the right place, because we believe that too. And today, we're discussing an important subject, how to build well-rounded schools. And to bring in somebody who really knows something about this, we have a special guest who we love very much, our very own Patrick Erwin.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Well, you'll hear more about Patrick in just a minute. He's really awesome.
Yes, we're so excited to have him. It's going to be a fun one.
It is.
So if you weren't sure about listening today, you picked the right one.
This is the right one.
It's the right one. But before we get started, let's answer our question. Question of the week. What is the most unusual hobby or activity that you've participated in?
Unusual hobby or activity?
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Yes. I don't know how unusual I am until I start to think, and then I keep coming up with unusual things.
I'm scared.
But I think as a kid, I got really, really into Pokemon cards, which had a moment. It wasn't that unusual when I was doing it. But my love for Pokemon cards, this is where it gets unusual, is in my high school years, I got really into Star Wars cards. It was like a whole universe.
Okay.
If you know, you know. It's one of those kinds of things. So.
And I don't.
And you don't.
Okay.
But the face you're making tells me that I was correct in thinking it was unusual. So.
I mean, it might not be unusual for all of our listeners.
Somebody's like, oh, yeah, I did that too.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Who's your favorite Pokemon?
Favorite Pokemon? It's sad that I still remember all their names, but I guess that shows how much Gyarados.
My kids are super into it, so I know some things. It's not Magikarp.
No.
Okay.
That's a funny one, though.
Yeah.
Patrick, you want to go?
I would love to. I had to think about this one because I have lots of unusual habits. My family is super into Legos. We've probably got 200 Lego sets, no joke.
Wow.
No joke.
And they're like on shelves and
They're on display. They're not toys. Don't touch my Legos. But that's not that unusual. So we have a group of friends, me, my wife, David, Jeff, Taylor, Caitlin, all wonderful people. Shout out to all of them. And we do escape rooms. We have done
that's fun.
upwards of 30 escape rooms and have never lost.
What?
We have been invited to beta test escape rooms, and we hold the record for fastest escapes on several rooms in the Atlanta area. So, yeah, escape rooms, super fun.
not only an unusual hobby, but also a point of pride for him.
It is. But that was pretty cool.
I've done an escape room with him, actually 2 different ones with him. He is very good.
I'm not surprised.
It meshes puzzles and telling people what to do, 2 of my loves. So
I almost hit my face on the microphone for that one. I mean, it's kind of true.
Gina?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't feel like I have an unusual hobby or activity I've done or do. I don't know. I just did like sports and stuff in high school and activities.
You're so normal.
I am. That's like the only part of me that maybe is normal. But, you know, I guess here it is. It's not really unusual, but
We'll be the judge of that.
it's not unusual. But, you know, I raised a whole human and then had another one.
Like, how old was your first son when you had your second son?
20.
oh, you legit started over.
Legit.
You waited until you were
you were, like,
successful to have
done.
the second one.
I was like, "Oh, I guess I did it. I guess I proved that I should do it again."
It's like you needed 20 years to build your confidence back up.
Or I can only raise kids one at a time. It's fine. So that's unusual in that sense. It's not really a hobby because I'll be like 58 when I have my next
Christian,
one.
you're not a hobby.
You're not a hobby.
You're so much more than that, Christian.
It does feel like there are so many things that we can be involved with, you know, nowadays. I love Patrick's example of escape room. Sorry, Andrew. I don't understand. But for adults and for students, there's so many things that like pique our interest and that we go all in on. And today we're going to talk about that big time taker for millions of our students around the country, which is extracurricular activities.
Absolutely, yeah. Think about how much, not only how many different extracurricular activities there are today, but also how much more time each of those activities is requiring of students today. It's a really big subject, right? Lots of kids are spending lots of time, especially after school, on this thing. And our friend Patrick works with us here at Growing Leaders. He serves as our director of curriculum. But before he came to Growing Leaders, he was actually a band director, and he was in schools working for, I think, 17 years, correct?
17 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is a long time. And he lived, obviously, in the school world. He also lived in the extracurricular world. And we just felt like he would be a perfect guest for today. So I feel like we should jump in by having Patrick tell us a little bit about himself. So Patrick, talk about that background and a little bit of your journey through education to where you are now.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'm a 17-year classroom teacher. 16 of those years was spent in one school here in the Atlanta area, Hillgrove High School, which we opened in 2006. As a second-year teacher, I got invited to help open a school,
That's awesome.
which was a
It's an
great
unusual
pleasure.
experience.
There you go. Yeah. Would I ever do it again? Absolutely not. I'm so glad I did it. Would never do it again. It was crazy. But we built Hillgrove from the ground up. The school has currently it's 2,400, 2,500 students, a big high school. And the band, most of my years there was between 280 and 300. And so we influenced a lot of people. And most people, when they think of a band director, the first thing that comes to mind is probably the movie Drumline, which was not at all what I did. I love that movie, and I have great respect for those people. Ours was much more, it was just different, to be honest. Much. If you go to a football game, it's much more like what the University of Alabama band does, not like Alabama A&M, if I'm being honest. But to say that being a marching band director is one thing, it's kind of like a coach and the season never ends.
Yeah.
Right? So we have band class, but then we have after school activities. And when marching band is over, we start something else. Indoor drumline, indoor color guard, jazz band, small ensembles. And so we have this joke in our profession. People would say, what do you do with all your time now that marching band is over? It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no time.
There's no such thing.
Marching band is spending all of your time on one thing. And the rest of the year is spending all of your time on 1,000 different things. To say that I have experience in extracurricular activities would be putting it mildly. There was always something going on after school. That was just the culture of the activity.
So good.
So, with your experience in the school system, but even also here through Growing Leaders, can you talk to us about why you feel it's so important that young people experience more than just academics? How do extracurricular activities contribute to that student's overall success?
That's a great question. And I would pose a question back to each of you.
Yeah.
Your greatest memories from high school, do they involve what happened in class or after school?
Definitely outside of the class.
It was the sport, it was the art, it was the performance, it was the practice, it was all of the things that happens outside of class. I'm not saying that these things aren't important. That's not what this podcast is about. But our greatest memories for me, it was from times I had in marching band. I was on the wrestling team. I can think of all of those times, both in practice and in meets. Some of them awful, but also memorable, right?
Right.
Just the struggle together. I played soccer, so I was I was an artist athlete at the same time. All of those friendships and memories revolve around what we did after school. It really is the heart of the school in many cases. And we would say a lot that every school could be divided into thirds. You have academics, you have athletics, and you have arts. It's tough to take a school and find a fourth category. And if you think, there's clubs, I would put those in the academic realm. And you can only impact some of those things when you think of after school with clubs, shows, games, whatever that looks like. And those are outside of the school day. That's where your school spirit comes from. That's where your school pride comes from, where your school culture comes from. As much as we want to be like, our math test scores are so high, right? As your administration are cheering and clapping, the students like,
it's going to be hard to get kids excited about that.
But if your school wins a state championship, it's a party. Right? That's what people feel the most drawn to in any given school. I also think that extracurricular activities are courage building. Let me explain. There's a principle called the Circle of Courage that I love. My friend Sandra Lake introduced me to it. Great educator. And the Circle of Courage involves creating belonging, independence, mastery, and generosity, right? I belong here. I can do a thing. I'm mastering that thing, and I'm sharing that thing with other people. My favorite place, the best place to share those would be in extracurricular activities because you're operating as a team. Obviously, you're on a team, so hopefully you feel like you belong. And no team that's worth its salt doesn't share its product, for lack of a better word, with other people. And the last kind of point I want to make on that question is there's an element of why behind it, right? Your extracurriculars are things that students volunteer for. I think you can tell a lot about your school when you consider what students are signing up and volunteering to participate. They don't get to choose. There's an element of choice in their classes, but I would always tell people I work in an environment with band where if students don't sign up, I lose my job. I have to convince them to stay. I have to convince them to join. I have to convince them to stay for 4 years. As my wife is a Spanish teacher. She doesn't have to convince kids to take Spanish in general. They sign up for that because they know that they need it, which leads to kids there that don't really want to be there. I had plenty of kids in band that didn't want to be there. Let's be clear. Their parents were making them or there was nothing better to do. But I think when you analyze a school and you start looking at this is what kids are volunteering to do, that you can learn a lot about your school in that regard.
Yeah, so wherever the kids are showing up, that's typically a sign that that thing's going well. There's health there.
For sure.
In a way that you can't tell with academics.
For sure. Unless it's like something terrible that they're signing up to do, like a fight club after school. Like you need to consider your values and everything.
If you have a fight club, you might want to shut that down. I'm just saying.
Maybe don't do that.
Yeah.
But the heart of your school is what kids are signing up for.
Yeah. That is so good. I feel like you've made a really great case for why these things are so important. I'm curious about if you could talk about examples of when it goes well. So what are some of the most effective programs or initiatives that you've seen, maybe even ones you've helped to create, that really affected or created a more dynamic school environment like you talked about? Can you share any specific stories of success and kind of what that looked like?
I can. So I spent a lot of time between band and football. Like any high school, the biggest groups of people extracurricular are going to be your marching band and your football team.
Just in terms of number of students.
Yeah, in terms of numbers of students participating and the visibleness, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
You go to a football game, what are you going to see? 2 football teams and a band.
Yeah.
And 2 football teams, 2 bands, and 2 cheerleading squads. Those are really the heart of that Friday night. And we're in Georgia, let's be clear. Football may not be the biggest thing in the world elsewhere, but
In
Friday Night Lights in Georgia is a big deal. It kicks off our college football weekend, and then maybe we watch the Falcons lose. So when you start to think about the relationship between band and football, it's a really interesting relationship. Band students go to every football game. I'm going to poll you and see how many band concerts or competitions do you think that football teams and players generally go to?
Very, very, very few.
Yeah, almost none. That's just how it is. I'm not throwing shade. If there were a way, we said all the time, like, how do we get football players to come to band contests? How do we get them to come to our concerts, et cetera? We even publicly challenged this to happen once in an assembly, and football players said, yes, we're going to come to your next concert. No one showed up. That was just part of the deal. But my friends, I have 2 friends, David and Taylor, part of our escape room crew, who teach at Kell High School. And the football coach's wife reached out to them and said, when's your next contest? Because we're bringing the boys. And they're like, oh, your kids? They're like, no, the team. The football team? Yes. And the Kell High School football team
That's like
goes to
80, 90 guys
the
more.
band contest to cheer for the Kell High School marching band.
That's awesome.
You want to talk about culture building? That's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's, speaking of unusual activities, that's as unusual as it gets. And so I would challenge my own school and every school to find creative ways to find each other, find yourself supporting each other.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge thing.
And extracurriculars are such a great way to do that, especially if you're doing it in ways that students may not
It's
expect.
where the excitement lives, really. Things that we did that I thought were really fun. We had mini parades after pep rallies. So after the pep rally was over, the marching band went in the hall, and we paraded the school. Drumline,
that's awesome.
Drumline indoors, first of all, was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. But we knew the time after the pep rally was kind of a wash anyway. And so kids would stand outside the classroom door. We would parade. The cheerleaders were in the front, the band, and sometimes the football team would follow behind us, and we would just parade the school. We would go by every classroom, go down into the courtyard, and then circle it up and play pep tunes as kids were going out for dismissal. And then the administrators would have to push everybody to the buses because the buses can't be late. It was a huge team building thing. Another thing that we did was whenever a team made the playoffs, big deal making the playoffs. They usually leave during the school day to go to playoff games here in Georgia. And so we would take a small contingent of band students and stand on either side of the door where they were leaving, and we would play for them. We were like the little school spirit, traveling school spirit, right? So we would do a little send-off. It became a joke even. Our AD, Sherry, she would send an email that said, softball team made the playoffs. They're leaving for Bannon County at 2 p.m. Please excuse the students. And my response to her was, do you need a send-off? She would say, we do. Okay, here's my list. Get these kids out of class. And we would just go do it real quick and come back.
That's awesome.
You build a lot of influence and credibility that way for your activity.
That's great.
But it's culture building. A couple other things that I think are great. Speaking of pep rallies, any school that uses a pep rally to highlight their programs, I think they're doing it right. So when you go to a pep rally, you're highlighting sports, right? That's what you do. It's what the pep is for. But we would have, like, our winter color guard would perform one pep rally so everybody could see what they were doing. The competition cheerleading squad, the dance team. Inevitably, we would play stupid games, but the highlighting of activities at the school that people didn't get to see, and not love sports.
Right.
You see those at games. Some of these are unsung heroes that go to dance competitions or ROTC kids going to shooting competitions or whatever. To get to highlight those programs is the literal highlight of those students' year. And then the last, I think, population of underserved, and we could do a whole podcast about this, is your special needs students. We had a program called United Sound, and it was for our band students to recruit special needs students into music ensemble.
Love it.
And they would spend time after school mentoring these young people, young special needs people, to teach them how to play an instrument. And I use quotes for that because it was really just, can you make a sound?
Yeah. Right.
Some of these students had physical conditions that made it so they could never be a part of a band class or never be a part of a musical ensemble. But we just kind of shrugged that off and said, sure you can. We would have a big concert at the end of the year, bring them out, and we would play, like the most recent one they played, Never Had a Friend Like Me from Aladdin. We did You've Got a Friend in Me once. It's all about friends, right? And we would play and they would play along with us, and there would be noises and sounds and ridiculousness and the standing ovation and the tears. We could play the hardest piece of music you've ever heard. Everybody would be like, yay, that was good. And we play You Got a Friend in Me with United Sound on there, and like you would have thought we won the stinking lottery. Man.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
A roar afterwards.
Our cheerleading squad got wind we were doing it and created Crimson Pride. And so it was a special needs cheerleading squad.
How
that did
cool.
the exact same thing. So I think there's not a student that could be left out of participating in activities if you think creatively outside the box. And if you would just give the kids a little bit of ownership of it, they'll probably surprise you.
Yeah.
You had said earlier, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but you had basically talked about how like it has been a space for you where culture has been built, courage can be built, and community can be built in extracurricular activities. And those examples highlight, kind of those 3 C's. I'm so glad that you're sharing this with us today,
Thanks.
Patrick. So if a school's listening, somebody, a teacher, a school administrator, somebody in a school community is listening, how could they encourage students to explore new interests and get involved in extracurricular activities, especially when like young people might be hesitant or unsure?
Yeah, I would tell my students when they got to the high school, or when I would talk to 8th graders, right, because they were the next year's high schoolers, you have to get involved in something.
Yeah.
Like being involved outside of the school day should be an expectation. And not that we should force it, but there should be something available that every kid in the school wants to be a part of. And so when you create that expectation or you talk about it, the barriers to participation are generally, I don't know that it exists. It takes too much time, or it costs too much money. The cost too much money thing should be an easy barrier. Booster clubs, sponsorships, foundations, school discretionary funds. Surely we can find ways to make that happen. Or just creating free ways to participate in clubs, et cetera. It seems like everything costs money. I have a senior who's in marching band and a freshman who does baseball. It's a fortune.
Right.
And we're very blessed to be able to provide our kids that. But inevitably, students can't participate because of money. And so the first thing you have to do is find ways to eliminate financial barriers. The second thing you got to look at is, what do they not know exists, and how can we make sure that they do know? Is it a fair, an activity fair? Is it the school news program? Is it flyers on the wall? Is it morning announcements?
Right.
But if you're not creative, like students will want to market their stuff. Teachers might. And that's, if I'm the club sponsor, I may or may not be comfortable talking about it to the other students. Now, the coaches, they're going to shout from the rooftops what they do generally. But how do you get into kids' ears about what is involved? And then how do you convince them and show them how to manage their time so they can participate? And how do you get your teachers to talk about it in class? Right? That would be a big deal. If I were running a school, I would, teachers, you got to be talking about opportunities that are happening after school, because kids need to hear it, and then they need to be told, you can do this. Right? You're not going to have so much homework. You're not going to be so stressed out that you can't participate. And maybe we need to offer some things in the mornings for those kids who may have to go to work after school.
Yeah.
But what exists, what barriers are there, and how do we break them down? I think that would be a big deal. And then just finding ways to promote it to your feeder programs, right? How do we make sure that our rising freshmen know that we have amazing programs? And I think our sports teams have got this figured out. Youth football, youth baseball, youth basketball, youth lacrosse, you just name it. We've got youth underwater basket weaving. Whatever exists, they're good at letting people know that it exists, right? But when you start talking about Hope Club, which is an awesome club for Hispanic students, or FBLA, or FA, great partner of Growing Leaders, band, theater, art.
A lot of times kids don't get into those things until sophomore year because they didn't realize.
Didn't know it existed.
Right.
Yeah. The number of students that we would have join the marching band their sophomore year, because, well, one, they would admit, I should have listened to you in the first place.
Yeah.
But the other one, because one, their parents weren't encouraging them.
Right.
Their school didn't let them know that they could do it. And there were all these myths out there. It takes 17 hours and it costs $47,000 and they don't let you do other things. It's like, guys, really? None of that's true.
Right. Right.
My parents made me join the band when I was in high school. They literally kicked me out of the car to band camp and said, bye.
But you know what? Like, to that point, I would say this. I think we were raised by different generations.
You're 100% correct.
Right? Because that was the expectation. Or we, at least, if we start something, we have to see it through to completion, right? And yeah.
It is a different environment.
different
you don't
now.
like it? We can quit.
Yeah.
Really? Come
Yeah.
on. And I think to the parents, this one's to the parents who are both of you that are listening. I would tell parents all the time. They would say, well, they're not making the grade and they're not doing this thing, so I'm going to pull them out. And my response was always, a better solution would be to tell me about it and let us hold them accountable. Because the accountability that comes from a coach like myself or your football coach is, I'm sorry, a different one than from the parents.
Yes.
So if you pull them out of an activity, you remove somebody that will help you hold your kid accountable to teach them a lesson. And if you remove the carrot, the thing that makes them show up for school in the first place, only trouble could exist from after that. And so that...
I was fortunate to raise a good kid and be raising another good kid, but he definitely listened to everybody better than mom.
All the time.
So all the coaches, I love you.
Absolutely. Parents would
deeply.
say, Mr. Erwin, can you come to my house and ask my kid to clean their room? Because they literally do everything you say and nothing we say. Sure.
It's a different relationship. It's a different relationship.
I'll swing by after class. So I want to talk about getting more students involved. You've spoken to this with United Sound, a couple examples, but how do schools ensure that all students, regardless of background or ability, have access to and feel included in these kinds of activities?
I think the bottom line on this question is what your end goal is. If your end goal is to win, if it's to be the best and to only take the best, et cetera, then you're by nature going to exclude people from your activity. My philosophy was we will take everyone that walks in through the door and we'll figure out how to give them a place.
How to involve them.
As a result, we ended up with all sorts of students who found a home in the one place that allowed them to be there. I had a student named Larson and another student named Alex. Both of them were autistic, high functioning, but very socially. It took some time to get to know them. We'll just put it that way. And I just said, we're going to figure this out. They're part of our family now. And the students were amazing. They would latch onto these students and say, we'll make sure. I remember we had a band contest once when Larson was having an episode. He was very hot and he was bothered and he was very annoyed and he was making all these sounds. And I kind of stopped what we were doing and looked over, and Carmen was her name. Carmen's a beautiful student, inside and out. And she says, don't worry, I got this. And she and Larson went for a walk while Patrick got to keep doing his job. It was truly amazing. And parents would come in and say, I would pay 3 times what you're asking us to pay for my kid to be able to do this. Because our goal was to create belonging and to give kids a home. And did it affect us competitively? Maybe. I know that winning games is kind of in a coach's DNA. And it's tough to say, well, we're not really here to win. We're here to include everybody. But at the end of the day, if your goal is to include everybody, you'll find a way for them to participate. You'll find a way that they can contribute.
Right.
And maybe they're not a starter, and maybe that's okay. But if our goal is to include kids, give them opportunities to lead and to impact each other and to create an environment where everybody feels like they belong, then that's the first step to breaking down barriers for kids participating. The other one would be financial. Things cost money. And schools and foundations and nonprofits have to find a way to work together to provide those opportunities for kids over and above just what happens in the school day.
Everything you shared has been so good, Patrick. Like, I mean, I felt like I knew you, but now I feel like I know you.
Hey-o.
Yeah. And all seriousness, like, I want to go to your school. So when are you going to build it? And your new school. Your new school. Because even just the way that you have shaped, you talked to us about belonging, mastery, independence, and sharing. And then I noted about the culture, courage, and community. And then the examples you've given have just illustrated that so well. I think there's a lot of listeners on here who are thinking, I want some of that and I want to do that. But I don't know, like I need maybe like a strategy or a resource that'll help me do this well. Can you tell us something that you would want our listeners to leave with after hearing you?
Now, this is not going to surprise you that this is my answer, but I do have an explanation as to why it is. Student leadership is the key to unlocking all of the things we've talked about today.
It is.
Because I was the guy that had 10,000 things to do. And if you as a student had something you wanted to do and you brought it to me to manage it, it was going to get put on the back burner.
Right.
And so for me, building student leaders in my classroom, giving them the awareness of their own ideas and a laboratory to practice them, giving them ownership and letting them know, I love this phrase, that they're free to lead. So I need you to seek my permission, but you don't need my assistance, right? Ready, set, go. That's how United Sound started. My student, Brenna, came to me and said, I want to do this. And I said, what do you need from me? And she said, I just need you to tell me to go. And I said, go. And she did all the work.
It's awesome.
If we hadn't spent 2 years before that growing so many leaders in our program that she could then feel both the ability to do that and feel like she was capable of doing it, it wouldn't have happened. I'm not going to start it. Many times we as teachers and coaches, we do things a certain way because it's the way we know how, and we don't have time to do it another way. Building student leaders, giving them opportunities. Man, students are dangerously good at getting other people involved in their stuff.
Say it.
When you give them the resources and the tools and then you turn them loose, you're free to lead. Just stay within the parameters of our values here in the organization. Ready, set, go. Amazing things will happen. Because then I went from there were 2 of us, 2 managers to 50.
Wow.
And they could just run with it. That's the big deal. We have to give them tools and opportunity and the freedom to try and to fail. And, Growing Leaders has an awesome curriculum called Habitudes that I got hired here to manage. And I came here because I believed in it, not because of the millions of dollars that they're paying me yet.
We're still getting there. Yeah.
But
buck at a time.
Growing leaders in your programs, giving them the tools, and then me having the tools through Habitudes to do that was the difference maker in our recruiting, retention, and efforts to impact the community.
Yeah. That's so good.
I love the idea of you want to see extracurriculars come alive. Develop your students as leaders.
Yeah. And then they will make them come alive because they know how.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah. Get out of the way.
Amen.
That's the advice we all got to follow. Well, Patrick, as always, I love having conversations with you. Thank you so much for your amazing advice and your leadership. There's a reason that you're here at Growing Leaders, because we were watching all the amazing things that you were doing and going, you need to teach other people to do what you've done, which is exactly what you've been doing for us today. So thank you so much for your wisdom and your insight, all your ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, this is also a shameless plug. He talked about Habitudes. We got a great program called Habitudes that you should definitely check out. Patrick is also one of our speakers here at Growing Leaders. And so if you're looking for some professional development, you can find out more about him at growingleaders.com and how you can bring him to your school. But Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
As our future podcast sponsor would say, it has been my pleasure. Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A's going to sponsor this?
They're going to sponsor us.
Oh, wow. I
Name
didn't
it and
know
claim
that.
I believe it.
Name it and claim it. All right, Gina. Patrick was amazing. We've heard a lot. So many ideas. Patrick's always full of ideas. We need a plan.
It's time for DMI. DMI, of course, stands for Don't Miss It. And in this segment, Andrew and I will pull out the one thing we thought was the most important from today's episode that we think that you shouldn't miss. So, Andrew, can you lead us?
Yeah. Well, we've both said it, but so much.
So much.
So there's a lot of things I could pull in, but I think my favorite thing Patrick said was when he talked about celebrating students, particularly pointing out students who don't always get to be celebrated. So he talked about making sure that a pep rally, that dance team that nobody has seen gets up there, or that color guard, or whatever, that cheerleading group, or whatever that is. To me, I think that's so huge, because for you, that's just another pep rally as the school leader. For that student, that's the highlight of their year.
Yeah.
And I think so much of the reason why extracurricular activities, like all of the ones going on, football is always going to be up front, right?
Yeah.
But all the other ones that are going on stay on the back burners because nobody pulls those kids to the front and goes, look at what these folks are doing. So I just feel like for a lot of people listening to this, the one thing they actually need to do is not create a new program or any of those new things. They just need to start to celebrate, identify, and create visualizations of what's already happening at their school.
That's really, really good. I feel like celebrate is the 4th C, because I'm going to bring it up one more time for the 3rd time in this episode, is really the 3 C's that Patrick taught us, which is, in extracurricular activities, you find the culture. of the school. You find opportunities for students to build their courage, and you also find ways to form and shape community. It's where young people build their pride and their love for their school. And speaking of the community part for a second, it kind of connects to what you said about Celebrate when he shared with us the story of the coach's wife who called and said, we're bringing the boys, meaning the football team, to the band performance. It reminded me, honestly, I talked about him a couple of times, but my oldest son, his coach did things like that. And just from what Patrick shared, it takes one person.
Yeah.
It takes that one person to do a different thing to create community, because community isn't one-sided.
Yeah.
Community is coming together and celebrating each other, not just one group celebrating another. And so, I'm going to say it one more time. Celebrate. That's one. C. Culture. It's where our young people can find culture. Courage is where they can build their courage. And then community. Yeah, Patrick rocked it for us today.
Yes, he did.
It was great.
This season's all about leading beyond the classroom, and I can't imagine a better way to do it than what we've been talking about today. So, Patrick, thank you once again. Gina, good insights. Love it. But especially we want to thank everybody listening to this. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the School on a Mission podcast. Now, before you hit skip on to the next podcast, we've got another challenge for you. You know what's coming. Grab a pen, a notebook, a sticky note, maybe even the back of your hand. Write down one action you're going to take this week. Maybe it's something you're going to do. Maybe it's something you're going to investigate inside of your school, something you're going to read more about. Maybe it's a person you need to meet with. Whatever it is, write it down. Okay? Got it? Perfect. Now shoot us a DM on social media. We want to hear the awesome things that you're up to and maybe even hold you accountable to those. We'd love to do that. And until next time, folks, stay curious, stay bold, and keep leading your school on a mission. The School on a Mission podcast is produced by Growing Leaders, a Maxwell leadership company. You can find out more about Growing Leaders at growingleaders.com. A special thanks to Patrick Erwin for joining us on today's episode. This podcast was produced by Angelica Oliver. To find out more about the School on a Mission podcast, head over to schoolonamissionpodcast.com.